Hello and welcome to Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion, a podcast where we deep dive single word concepts or ideas within the Dungeons & Dragons 5e framework. My name is Danilo, and I like all kinds of games and the crunchy mechanics that make him tick. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and I'd really appreciate a like or a follow. Today is a very special episode as we are welcoming back a guest from a previous episode, Jamie Mitchell.
Hello.
Who joined us on Mistakes. The episode wasn't a mistake, it was a very good episode. And that was all the way back in episode 7. I say all the way back, it's only halfway back. So, yeah, welcome again, Jamie.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me again.
Yeah, that's all right. We had a lot of fun. I think it's simple to say, and
Things did get a bit weird towards the end, but yeah, it was great.
They got unique. So I hope everybody knows what they are about to buckle up for with this one. So today's topic is a bit nicer, I suppose, than mistakes. Today we're talking about progression. So, what does progression mean to you, Jamie?
Within context, the obvious thing that comes up is the different methods of progressing your characters through the game. So the obvious one is the juxtaposition between traditional EXP advancement versus milestone. It seems to me that the EXP or XP progression tends to just pretty much almost just be a Adventurers League thing now, a inverted commas professional game thing, whereas most people that I've chatted to that are DMing tend to stick to the milestone progression because there's a hell of a lot less maths for one thing, but also more than that, I think it gives the DM an element of control in that you don't get that classic thing of you kill a kobold when you hit level 11 and that's the one thing that pushes it up, and not having to juggle through an entire party as well. So that's the first thing that springs to mind, really.
Yeah, I think that's the low-hanging fruit of progression.
I'm always a fan of low-hanging fruit, man.
in D&D 5e, and yeah, I like the implicit nature there of that we're not professional in that because we use milestone, so we're just some amateur scrubs. Now, in the defense, and this is really good timing, in the defense of Adventurers League and XP leveling, I was reading only the other day in defense of Adventurers League. Basically, there was an unpopular opinion on Reddit that basically said Adventurers League sucks and I don't know why it's a thing and so popular. And the defense was basically it's a really good vehicle if you want to keep progressing with a character. Like if there's a character you really love and want to take from 1 to 20, AL is probably the only place you're really going to achieve that, because you can just drop in and drop out and join a different campaign in a different city with your same level 12 character that you've had from before. So despite, I mean, I'm in the same school of thought as yourself with milestone leveling, but I never thought of it that way, you know. I never thought of, oh hey, I can really see how that's, you know, almost like carrying a character with you on a USB stick, or probably literally with a digital character sheet, and just kind of being like, oh hey, here's the guy that I last played with in London, and now we're here in Southampton, and he's followed me this whole way, and I've seen him through it, rather than a one shot. Or
I hadn't really considered that. I suppose one of the massive benefits with that incredible standardization that you get within EXP and specifically in Adventurers League is that it doesn't matter if that campaign, that table falls apart, because you do just pick up, go to the next, and because of that standardization, you know that you're able to, like you say, keep progressing that character. So that is good. I don't think I've ever played at a table just with people that I didn't know. I've always stuck with my core group, which have been going for a few years now. So that, for me, it would be interesting. I would, if I was DMing it, I'd be scared for the players. And if I was playing, I think I'd be scared for the DM, to be honest.
I think you've got to be a certain type of play. Like, you have to be super open-minded and super flexible as a player. I think that if I was by the hand of God pulled up out of my chair now and dropped at a table with a character sheet, I'd just try and hit the ground running as a doing. many areas of my life, and just kind of be like, okay, let me read the table. Is this a serious face game, or is this a stupid, goofy game? And then you're just gonna have to, just gonna have to go with it.
I think, yeah, I think I'd probably approach it from the opposite angle, in that I sit down at a table, try and assess the general mood, and then try and prod it in a random direction. I mean, for evidence at the moment, playing through Strahd, and yeah, I mean, I've probably urinated more than most characters do in Strahd.
I don't know whether I want to pull on that string or not.
I'm a gnomish wizard eccentric. Like, he's crazy and he's unhappy, and unhappy. Everyone's fucking unhappy. It's Barovia. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there is that. It depends on what the vibe of a table is, because I try and keep it within the realms of whatever's going on, but also to try and expand out the palette that you have on a table. I mean, this is getting quite off topic now, but I suppose there is also an element of progression in that, like the progressing through the different styles of play that you get episode by episode, or session by session rather, sorry. So you've got that some sessions are very, very serious, other sessions are even quite jokey, even within a fairly standardized table and a standardized setting.
Here's the secret of my podcast though, Jamie, is that the topics are so deliberately ambiguous that we can pretty much talk about anything, and I can always tenuously link it back to the topic at hand. So you're absolutely right by saying we're talking about progression of you as a player almost at this point. So
yeah, I wouldn't have guessed that or thought that. No, I was completely under the spell.
So talking of, that low hanging fruit earlier on of XP versus Milestone, as I've mentioned, I join you in that camp of Milestone is better for the way I play my game. I'd probably say 9 times out of 10 it's probably the way to go, probably outside of AL, unless you're playing 90% dungeon exploring and 10% social, then maybe you'd want to go XP, but otherwise I don't see why you would.
Do you think that's driven by necessity, and that you just look at the leveling system and the EXP and think that's a whole lot of maths that I don't really want to do, that can actually push players slightly further apart, as opposed to just being into, okay, you've done this large group task that I needed you to do, so that, is it a thing by necessity, or is it because you think it works better, do you reckon?
6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Now, I know there are disadvantages to Milestone, and the major one I hear is that basically you're giving more power to the DM, and they already have like a shitload.
And how much more power does a god need?
Exactly. You could just keep pumping power into them, and some players might already feel on the back foot, at the whims, at the mercy of the DM. So then to tie how powerful they are into just when the DM says they can get more powerful, I can see why that might rub some people up the wrong way.
Yep.
And that's a legitimate point, and absolutely there'll be DMs out there that put the carrot on the end of the stick and say go left or you won't level up.
Yep.
It's a tool in their utility belt to railroad, essentially. As with all tools, it's how they're used, right?
Something I'm only just thinking about as well, actually, is it does open quite a lot of kind of option for massively favouring one play style. So if your campaign or you as a DM lean toward more story driven, then you could start only leveling players who engage with the game in a certain, not only leveling players, only leveling the party when certain players engage with the game in certain ways. So your barbarian's out there one-handedly taking down Tarrasques, but he never gets the level up session. It's always your bard who has won over the heart of the local burgomaster or whatever local official. So I can see, actually, there's a bit of potential for favoritism kind of messing things up there as well, which I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah. So, I mean, all that being said, I think the drawbacks of XP vastly outweigh that one or two drawbacks of Milestone. So one is, to answer your previous question, maths. Man, I've already got way too much going on And the last thing I want to do at the end of a combat encounter is go, shit, how much was that kobold worth? 20 XP. Right, let me plug that into my Excel spreadsheet of numbers.
Mm.
You know,
I can see it working for savants where you're just really comfortable at doing incredibly quick maths and incredibly organised and totting it all up at once. That is not me.
Yeah, and also that if you do it like that, you can't help but if somebody has to miss the session, which happens. Like, no game is perfect. People always miss sessions. People can't make it for whatever reason, and I can't imagine the disappointment if that player were to return the following session and be like, "Oh, everyone else leveled up. That's cool. What did they do? Oh, it was I rolled on the random encounter and table, and a couple of giant spiders came out of the forest. They killed them, and that was enough to level up. Oh,
Yeah.
great, cool. I guess I'll wait until we fight some giant spiders, and then I get to level up too, and I'm now permanently behind the rest of the party. Cool, great.
Yeah, this is where that progression of different characters at different times, really, really can cause an issue. I'd imagine within that progression system.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of maintaining parity, and obviously the simplest way to do that is by keeping everybody the same level, which is one reason I'm also reticent to bring in, say, the deck of many things, because that has some level adjustments hidden in there, which I'm way too risk adverse to bring that in.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I've actually given one of my players the deck of many things in a drunken fit of of ridiculousness. But luckily, all the other players have bullied the hell out of him so much that they every now and again he'll kind of gesture to the pocket it is, and they'll freak out at him. So that's quite good. They manage themselves fairly comfortably with that, actually.
Yeah, so yeah, I just can't be bothered to deal with the numbers when designing combat encounters is a pain in the ass enough. The other major detriment is non-combat encounters should also still give XP.
Yeah,
which is you're already outside of a framework to a certain extent there. So a combat encounter will tell you how much XP it's worth. 2 grand. Cool. Bish bash bosh. Done.
Sorry, there's a comic called Order of the Stick from the Giants in the Playground forum. It's a webcomic, and there's a strip in there where the whole party levels up, except you never know that he's chaotic evil, but I mean he is chaotic evil halfling, and the entire party levels up, and he's gutted because he doesn't level up, and then he does some soliloquy about how pissed off he is that he haven't leveled up, and then bing, he magically levels up through the role play. It is that wonderful point of so even within that very rigid and, like I say, standardized numbers based EXP, there is that leeway given to the DM to basically still go, well, if a player does something you particularly like, then go for it.
Which kind of defeats the purpose, right? It's like, you know, if I was in that position and a player missed a game and they came back and they were bummed out that they didn't level up because the rest of the guys killed some giant spiders, I'd be really, really inclined to introduce some like super on the nose, you know, encounter for them to talk their way past, or to have a moment to moment, just so I'd have a reason, an excuse to be like, oh well, you got round to that non-combat encounter, so you get some XP, which, surprise, surprise, levels you up. Ta-da! And then you're just back to milestone progression anyway. So
it's just milestone XP that you didn't know, milestone progression you didn't know was coming.
Yes, yeah. So I think all things considered, and you're never going to escape the "have we leveled up yet" trope in the same way you'll never escape the "I've got dark vision" trope. So it doesn't matter which which method you pick, you're always going to have that question from your players of, please sir, can we level up yet? And shooting straight, there is a little bit of me that says, do you know what, no, fuck you guys.
I was going to say, actually, generally the way that my table runs is that they level up when they've bullied me to an extent, or I've got drunk and uncharacteristically kind. So yeah, I mean, it's quite often I've skipped them ahead, not skipped ahead levels, but there have been things where I haven't realised quite how long some part of the arc is going to take, and so I've planned for them to be at certain levels at certain milestones,
Yeah.
and they're like, but it's been 3 months
Yeah.
and we're bleeding and we're tired. Just give us something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a double-edged sword for sure. But you know, I think that I do think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. But yeah, sometimes I relish it, and sometimes I do feel bad that wow, okay, yeah, I've as a DM have misjudged how long this is going to take, and you know, hands up, my players haven't leveled up in. Man, I couldn't even tell you when they leveled up last, and it's purely because It's like when you hoard potions in an RPG, or you hold on to your ultimate ability in a video game because you're waiting for that just the right time. It's a bit like that for milestone leveling up for me as a DM. I'm thinking, oh, that was a hard battle, but I know that there's maybe a harder battle on the encounter, and that'll be more rewarding. So let's just hold on for that one before they level up, and then unbeknownst to me, they go left, and the encounter was right, and oh well, that's 6 months of level 7. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think quite often what will happen is that they'll ask me, then they'll grind hard for a couple of sessions because I've said no, and whether that's a subconscious thing on the part of the players that they know that they've got to struggle through a bit more, or whether it's just on me that I'm actually pacing them a little bit harder just so that when we get to the end I can go and now you level up. And to be honest as well, that can even be just a session of roleplay. So they've had the really hard battle. You let them chat it out for an entire session and kind of decompress after the main event, the main combat, or whatever encounter it may be. And then it's at the end of that, usually not the long rest or whatever, where you go and then you level up, and that can give a real sense of progression, because not only have they done the thing, because this is the thing, if they've been beaten the hell out of by whatever high XP monster or mob that it is, that at the end of that to go, yeah, you've been beaten the shit out of, you're all on 3 HP and you level up, seems a little incongruent with actually what's going on. But having been able to take a step back, go, God, wasn't that really hard? But now we've got to carry on and do this other stuff, and then they level up, seems to narratively work a little bit better. But I'm very, very story driven with this stuff.
Same. But there was a point in there you mentioned about leveling up kind of like mid-dungeon, and it made me think about, mentioning about balancing encounters. And if I design a dungeon, I'm usually designing the whole thing at once for them as they are today. And if you were running XP based, they could level up midway through, and depending on the size of the party, make the next 50% of the dungeon redundant, trivial.
This has happened to me with boss battles several times, man. I say several times, maybe not several, but there have been like big things that they've worked up to, and then they've kind of breezed it because I'd put it as a hard, deadly encounter for level 8, and then by the time they got there, because they'd had that really long grind before, I'd kind of leveled them up out of just because it seemed appropriate, and then that has been a slightly underwhelming boss battle. My campaigns tend to be, there's a big overall story, but I'm quite good at filling in random gaps, because if you go back to the mistakes episode, you'll see that I hadn't got a bloody clue what I was doing when I started. So with that, I'm quite good at going, okay, right, even though that boss, so there's going to be a load more challenges that you're going to hit straight after that in order to make up for it slightly.
Yeah, as I said, funnily enough, in that episode, I'm way too prideful to just trivialize 50% of my dungeon. Well, the alternative is you have to design the dungeon. You just got to add so much more overhead to yourself to preempt the level up. So you kind of got to work out when they'll level up during the dungeon to then up the difficulty on the rest of the encounters based on your prediction of, okay, if they fought those 3 guys, then they'll level up here in this room, which means that technically the encounters later on that are higher level, and then you open up yourself a whole can of worms of, oh, they only fought 2 of the guys. Oh, well, the rest of the dungeon's going to kill them. So
this is probably considered...
I just don't get it.
No, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. This is probably a little cheap But this is where I think your DM tool bag of basically explaining everything away with magic comes in, because there's nothing stopping you from saying, and as you pass through the next portal, you enter the room, all the doors lock, a gas is released, and you'll undergo take 1 point of exhaustion, and you can feel this poison is now making it progressively harder. You're going to keep getting exhausted. The door in front of you opens so you can keep going, but it means you've got to get to the end of the dungeon, get the antidote and whatnot. There's always ways that you can make their lives bloody hard.
Yeah. But Milestone leveling gets rid of all that necessity. So I can see why. I think as long as it's not super stingy and it makes sense and it hits those story beats where it makes sense to do so, and not like, oh, we just got our asses kicked, here's a reward with a level up.
Yeah.
So here's something that'd be good to get your take on. Here's what I've done. So as I've mentioned many times, probably too many times, that my players not as au fait with the rules as I perhaps would appreciate them to be. So I tried a number of different methods, asking nicely, kind of in-game inspiration, all the usual, talking to them about it, all the usual kind of things. And I said, you know what, I'm tired, so here's what I'm going to do. And this is probably, I'm going to get lynched for this, what I'm about to say, this taboo of, I've tied their real-world human being knowledge to their character knowledge by saying, if we can go 3 sessions without a rules question, you guys will level up, independent of the milestone system. So theoretically, you could level up twice in 1 session.
Okay.
So I said, there you go. If anything is going to get you to learn the bloody rules, it's going to be a free level up.
Yeah.
And which is really going to come into play when we start after the holiday period, when we return in a couple of weeks. And it's one of those, I may as well get a little flip counter of my wall to say sessions since last rules question. And it's pretty much sat on 0 since we started playing. And it's I keep the funny thing is I keep drawing attention to it. I'm like, oh well, that counter's back down to 0, and somebody will be like, what? Sorry, what are you saying? I'm like, oh, the counter for your free level up that you're not going to get for another 3 sessions. That's back down to 0. And I'm like, oh, you. And this is making me sound like some malevolent, evil bastard that's just kept them all at level 1 50 sessions in. No, not at all. I'm talking about, do I get sneak attack as a level 8 rogue, or can I cast a spell? No, because that's not in your spell list and you're already concentrating on another spell. Okay, I'm talking those kind of, but he's come into my space, so I get an attack of opportunity, right? No. I'm talking those kind of questions, just to make me seem like less of a bastard.
So would you, if they were discussing rules amongst, this is again heading off a little bit, but kind of isn't. If say your characters or your players, one of them tried to do something or was trying to do some kind of maneuver, and one of the others said, oh no, I don't think you can do that, like does a little bit of rules lawyering, and you don't have to get involved, would that be all right? Like, provided they sort it out amongst themselves and roughly know what they're doing, that would be good enough for you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, usually that doesn't really happen because typically it's only in combat, so the spotlight is on that person. So I can't not be involved as a DM because I'm there waiting for them to do their bloody turn.
Right.
And so the moment they can't do it for whatever reason, I'm like, well, you've impacted the game because you haven't read the rules, and that's a bad thing, right? You can't.
Yep.
That's like driving without having driving lessons and you crashing into a lamppost. You've impacted everybody else's thing because you haven't spent the time to learn. And just because no one got hurt doesn't mean that you're not a fool.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think it's probably table differences as well, because I mean, I've got at least one character that's pretty hard on the rules lawyering, which works for me sometimes. Other times I have to be like, no, stop saying the things that you're saying. This is how this is going to rule anyway.
Yeah. I should probably count my blessings that I don't have to worry about shutting people down. Usually I'm asking for support.
Right, yeah. So I don't think there is a problem, because there's a couple of things going on there. One, you've got to be able to have fun as the DM, and if you feel like you are having to borderline take characters goes for them almost. Like you're having to handhold them through till they get to the inevitable choice for that turn. God, I can't imagine much more boring than that. The entire fun of DMing the thing is a lot of it's having players screw up your games and do weird and bizarre things that you wouldn't have ever considered doing yourself. So if you're having to constantly manage that at the table, then because what you've done there is you've got carrot. It's not like you've not offered them something. It is this free level up, which is fantastic. However, at the same time, there is the element of stick there that unless you fulfill X criteria, you're not going to get it. So it is still putting it on player choice, which is all about. There's a slight argument, like you've already made, for the you're tying real world knowledge to the in character knowledge. But it is a game. There is a fairly strong element there that you need to. You should be getting better at it time on time. And again, you don't want to rule out your casual, in inverted commas, player from that. There's always going to be one player at your table that has slightly different priorities to the rest, that's more interested in playing the game just as a casual game and a social. But if that's starting to impact either the other players or your ability to play within the game, then you need to be able to do something about it. And if you've got multiple players that are doing this, then a solution which will affect the whole party or cause the whole party to have to work together, as again, argument is causing slight friction. And then there's also the thing of you've got to be able to all have fun there. And if you're giving them the option to doing it, it's not that you're stopping them from leveling up full stop. This is an extra thing that they could get. So no, I don't really see a problem with that.
Okay, good. That makes me feel better. I do often worry that I'm that evil teacher of, well, if no one owns up, everybody gets the tension. I mean, to be fair, that's kind of the environment I want to breed. I want the other players to be like, okay, learn the rules, dude, because I also want this level up. I want them to encourage each other. But then, on the same breath, when that other person doesn't, then you're kind of implicitly punishing those that do want to learn. So, I don't know. There's pretty reams of theory and academic work on
it's psychology, isn't it?
Yeah, that I'm way underqualified to comment on in any stretch.
Group psychology, healthy dose of bullying.
It's the business. It's my white collar management in me coming out of being like, do the work, get rewarded.
Yeah. No, but I mean that's how you get progression.
Yeah. In a nice way, it's a nice mirroring of player progression versus their character progression, and I'm trying to bend the lines together and make them match. So as the players get better, the characters get better. And as I said, the alternative is maybe one levels up and the others don't. But then I'm back into square one of, well, then they have even less incentive to play because they are behind, in inverted quotes, their peers. So it's a minefield. It seems like such a benign thing, right? Leveling up in an RPG. It's just rote. It's just what most of the bloody game is. And yet we've spent almost 32 minutes talking about it and haven't even really
scratched the surface. But I mean, this just shows you the massive, the vast kind of crevasse between tabletop and computer game RPG. Because in a computer game, everything's done for you. You get to choose your progression path, but in terms of the actual leveling up, well, that's when you finish the level, or in most RPGs, when your character kills all the things, because you've got an algorithm running the maths for you. When it's on you, that's a very, very different level of responsibility that you've got to take on as the DM.
Yeah, I was never like a huge fan of RPGs, certainly more, from Japan and the like of Final Fantasies and whatnot. I played them, but now I'm thinking back, there was always something that never really sat right with me. And now I think about it, it's probably the leveling up system, because it almost seems redundant in a way. So in the same way that I was talking earlier on, like you'd scale a dungeon to match the player's level, the enemies in an RPG are scaled to match where the designers think the characters will be at that time, based on an average playthrough, which again kind of defeats the purpose. Those bosses in traditional RPGs are hard doors, they're hard gates to say you cannot get past this unless your characters are,
X level.
yeah, a certain level.
Mm.
Which is weird. It's like, don't have levels then. Just
Just you do it as levels, as in the rather than a character level, just the actual level of the game.
yeah, or you another way to progress the characters outside of raw numbers, and it's one of the reasons that I fell out of love hard with World of Warcraft, is because that's the most egregious example of, like, if an NPC has a skull next to it, which is probably copied from MMOs before it, like, that thing's just going to one shot you, and it's just it just rubs me up such the wrong way that you can be a level like 50 arcane wizard, but because you've gone into the next area, the fucking frogs will kill you.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That's like, if you say that like that, it sounds super dumb.
Yeah. Really, really immersion breaking. Absolutely. And I think because you're very into the total immersion within a character, I think that's one of the things that really grabs both of us about D&D. Then something like that does just hits that, well, no, this isn't realistic, this isn't congruent, this is breaking the story, this is world breaking in the most egregious way, then yeah, no, I can understand that really putting up. I nearly brought up World of Warcraft because talking about South Park did that couple of episodes, and sorry, massive spoiler alert here, but the way that they eventually get to where they need to be in the end is by staying in the safe place and killing pigs. And so there is that thing of just grinding in order to get to level 100 or whatever your system you're using is, yeah, no, it doesn't sit right at all.
No, and like, you can, if you run XP rules as written, you can totally do that in D&D.
Yeah.
Like, that person that's come back after a week off because they've had a holiday and they're a level behind, the rest of the players might be like, all right, we're going to go and see the wizard in his tower to find out what our next quest is. And that player's character's going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to head outside, into the wilderness for just half an hour. Just give me half an hour, guys. And then you have to, like, the DM finds themselves in a position of running a one-on-one combat with one player character. Yeah, just to get his XP to level up.
Yep.
And then you either do that and everyone's bored, or you just say, okay, you did it and you leveled up. Yep. Therefore, defeating the purpose of XP-based system again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not a fan of XP for that myriad number of reasons. There's probably a couple of others we haven't even touched on that, but...
Yeah. I can see, time and a place, Adventurers League, as we said.
Yep.
It has a purpose, and a lot of people get enjoyment out of it. But for pretty much every home game, I can't see how it works unless you're playing, like a super mechanical, super, like, hex-based game where every single thing counts and the DM puts a hell of a lot of effort in. So fair play to the DMs that do that.
Yeah, big up yourselves.
Yeah, props.
And also, if you could write in, if any of you are good at doing taxes as well, because if you calculate an XP like that, you're probably pretty good at it, so I could use a hand there.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that if you didn't want to do it.
Yes, yeah. Okay, I mean, I had a few other bits and bobs on XP and progression. I think one more thing before we move on to other parts is that most campaigns are, and I apologies in advance, I can't cite my sources just at the moment, but, and I've mentioned it on a previous episode, where most campaigns and games are, the bell curve is basically levels 1 to, say, 7, and then it really bottoms out until level 20, where it spikes again for people playing one-shots. I just want to have fun, level 20 character, because we never get to level 20.
Right.
And I was going to ask, why do you think that is? Why is there that banding so strong? Why is basically levels like 11 to 20 just this wasteland where no one ever plays?
I mean, I really can't speak to that because I've played so many level 11 games.
Thanks for just proving me wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a table thing though, very much. I think possibly part of it is that a lot of So people want to do an interesting build if you're a player that has been playing for a while. So, okay, when you come in, you are basically starting out playing the game. You don't know what you're doing. You're level 1. That means that you kind of have to have that initial, not too many rules to think about. Those tend to move very quickly, those first couple of levels. So when you are very first coming to the table for the first time ever as a player, you need that very limited rule set in order to be able to actually just comprehend anything. There's almost that built-in way of helping the player learn the game at level 1 and 2. By the time you get to level 3, then you're actually starting to be able to do some interesting shit. That's obviously where the vast majority of classes come into their own. So for very first starting out, that initial kind of first 3 levels is very much for teaching players to play. Then you've got level 3 where if you had already played a few sessions and you were kind of comfortable, then you can just drop in at level 3, and that is you know you are a rogue. You've got your roguey things you can do. You know your X, Y, or Z. Your character is already fairly solid, and you've got that smallish skill set that you can use, but that's still specialized. I think between 3 and, do you say 7?
Yeah, it's around that point. Yeah,
That's quite easy to manage both as a player and as a DM. There's not shed loads of rules. It's still swingy enough to make it quite interesting as well for both of you. When you start getting up towards the mid, like as soon as you can't hit double digits, then you are looking at something that players are quite a lot harder to kill. A level 10 party can steamroll some really high CR things if they're played with reasonable intelligence and get a few good rolls in. So I think it does become a lot harder for the DM at around that double digit point. Also, tables are fickle things. Sometimes they last, sometimes they don't. I'm lucky in that even throughout all of this lockdown, we've just been able to move over to online. I can see there's plenty of tables where that couldn't happen for whatever reason, connectivity, people just not having the technical wherewithal or the interest, because it is different. If your player's there just to have the social, and then all of a sudden actually what they're doing is sitting on a Zoom call for 4 hours, not getting a chance to talk and not having that human interaction, I can see people not wanting to switch over to that. I think the double digits to level 20 is a kind of middle ground where your players have already got the knowledge where they could deal with a level 20 character. So what's the point in missing out half the skill set if you're going to drop in? In my case, though, actually, I either run one shots at level 3 for players that don't really know what they're doing. Level 11 for my players that do know what they're doing, because that's a nice number to get a cool build in. You can get some really interesting builds within there, but it's not super stupidly OP. So I do run a lot of one shots at level 11 actually, but it's that seeing the thing all the way through, because you can write a campaign, but if everybody is engaging with it hard, then your one shot can take a month, or in my case, my 6-month campaign can take 3+ years. So I think there's that. It's kind of a no man's land, because it's for people that really know the rule set. This may be why you're having trouble with playing it. But people that know the rule set want to experiment, and they're just going to have a play about with something. So I can only really speak to my own table on that one. But the progression that I've seen from level 1 to I think they're level 11 now, is just awesome. You can't get it. You can't get it really in any other way, because their characters have fought to get there.
I'm torn, because I think that'll always be in D&D for me a level of fourth wall breaking when it comes to levels up, because it is so story and character based for me. the fact that over the course of one night they wake up and become way more powerful on some levels, it just is weird to me. Like if they have a fight, go to bed, wake up, and can do things they couldn't do before, that is always just a bit like, but why couldn't I attack 2 times yesterday, but now I can attack 2 times today? I don't know.
Or managing that narratively is really difficult as well, actually. So there are ways and means of doing it. I think, is it level 3 that hex blades actually get their hex weapon, or is that level 1? It's probably level 1, isn't it? But just an example, in one of my other campaigns, a character wanted to multi-class into Hexblade. And so I kind of stipulated that's fine, but we're going to want to work this in narratively.
Yeah.
And I think people tend to pay more attention to that when it comes to multi-classing. People are more willing to go, okay, well, then you're going to have to go and train with a monk in order to be able to fulfill that prerequisite to be able to multi-class. Whereas I don't think people apply that so stringently to things like just base level up. So, okay, yeah, you can attack tomorrow, but you've got to go out and kill a million squirrels. Not that, but you know what I mean. You've got to be doing the training. You've got to be narrating the training in order to be able to let me do these things to progress you. I mean, to be honest, most of the time I hand wave it. You watch some of the professional DMs and they work their level ups into it massive, like incredibly well. The other thing to briefly mention as well is magic items give you a much nicer narrative way of progressing the characters. So you could use MacGuffins as a narrative device to slightly fix that incongruence. I mean, don't you really? It would be stupid if they ended up having to get 20 magic Dragon Balls. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, there are little narrative things that you could try and work in there.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. I've heard other people say, like, you can homebrew magic items to give class features from other classes, so people aren't forced to multi-class for something that, for just one minor thing that they want. So you can give, some Ring of Rage that makes someone have a Barbarian Rage once per long rest as a kind of soft multi-class for them, which is, I think, quite an elegant way of doing it. But here's my ironic hypocrisy of myself, in that on one hand I'm scared of giving players magic items because it will make them overpowered, but in the same breath I don't like leveling them up because it doesn't make sense to me in the world. So the solution to that is giving them magic items to level them up because it doesn't make sense in the world. So I'm just shooting myself in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, you've constantly got to manage your own comfort with the party that you're running. What happens when your party's progression outstrips your ability as a DM? Like that's got to be a pretty intimidating situation to be in.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a head out.
Yeah, campaign's over.
Yeah.
You're all too good for my ability. And I am scared of that, and maybe I shouldn't be, but I have to say, with 6 players at level 8, the kind of creatures they're fighting and how complex combat is, man, I gotta say, I'm not super looking forward to more complicated combat. It scares me a little. The spell slots I'm going to have to track, the number of NPCs I'm going to have to track, the level of the design of the environment they're fighting in. I'm scared of having to design and keep track of. It's, I kind of pine for the day when it is just 4 guys that are level 3, just smacking around a bunch of gnolls.
Yeah.
And the most exciting it gets is they've thrown a net on you. Whereas now it's like, okay, the back line is a couple of sorcerers, the front line is a couple of mounted guys who are going to jump off their mounts when the HP gets to this level. The backline sorcerers will try and, tactics like this. That's just at level 8.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting point, man. So I generally don't have monsters either. It's some kind of real serious. So feature monsters and mooks, I think, is a good way of going there, because realistically, a lot of when they're what character at level 11, a lot of stuff that they're going to be fighting doesn't have that amount of special rules. It's just mob. However, you have your one or two big guys that are gonna, you've got special rules, and they're getting your most attention as the DM for me. I am also really, really good at winging it, apparently. The one thing that you have to be really careful of there is not screwing it up and, oh, it did 3d8 damage to this character last turn, but then it's only done 2 this turn. Do you like, because if you, as soon as you do something like that, then the entire thing is completely smashed to shit anyway, and you can't carry on, really. Or you just lose your trust, the trust of your players, and if you don't have the trust of your players and you don't have buy-in from them, then you can't really do it. So yeah, I mean, this moves on to DM progression, doesn't it? It's a very smooth segue there. I like it. But that thing of having to run more and more and more complicated encounters, I think one thing that you can maybe do there is, and you probably do this anyway, because you're either a devious bastard or quite a clever guy, depending on which way you look at it. But playing not just to the features of the creature, you play it within its stat block, obviously, but changing tactics. So my party had a submarine, and they were travelling across the ocean. It was, well, I say a submarine, it's the apparatus of Quellish, but it's a slightly juiced up version that I've got that's a little bit more usable in some situations and not in others. They came across, I think it's Sahogin. Yeah, it would have been Sahogin because they had the priestesses, I think. So they came across the Sahogin. They've had a couple of fights with them, and they generally kicked the crap out of everybody, but then didn't finish off the last one. It just swam off and left them to it. So what that had meant is that at least one creature had seen the party, but more importantly had seen them entering and exiting the machine. In order to get into the machine in the first place, it was something like a DC 20 int check for the party, because they'd never seen anybody do it before. You've just had a relatively intelligent, sentient creature. I mean, not super intelligent. I think it was, I can't remember, it was normal Sogin or a priestess. But they'd seen what they were doing, so they knew roughly how to do it. So the next time that they encountered one of those mobs, it was a couple of priestesses, so basic spellcasters, but they had Thunderwave. And so their tactic was get inside the thing and cast Thunderwave. Now, that's not a particularly complex, I didn't have to worry about lots and lots of how are they going to use all of these certain special abilities. I mean, somebody's going to go, they don't have that spell. Yeah, I know they didn't, but or they don't on stat, but this is obviously homebrew everything in order to fit. And I think the idea of effectively suicide bomber Sahogin priestesses is just too cool to let up. But that kind of little tweak doesn't take too much more brain power in terms of having to worry about complex abilities, but does bring that thing for the players of, oh, we're going to have to deal with this in a different way, or it brings in that element of fear, something I was talking quite a lot about in the mistakes episode. Keep your players scared.
Yeah, that's nice, and it sounded like a very good encounter to be a part of.
I mean, they smashed it. They killed the things, no problem. It wasn't an issue. But their little faces, when the first one climbed in through the back and they went, what? Why are they doing that? How are they doing that? What's going on? Well, I mean, she's just done it, so you can deal with that. And I know, this is the thing, I know perfectly well that there was a congruent reason as to why. And then once they were in there and you saw the first one go, and she casts Thunderwave, and you just saw everyone's face go, that's that moment you live for as a DM.
Yeah.
Not leveling up.
No, funnily enough. Yeah. My players are still, it's going to sound like they haven't left this bloody dungeon for years, but we haven't played for 2 months. So going through their kobold dungeon, and of course, kobolds are also intelligent, in quotes, clever enough to make traps.
Devious,
Yeah, clever enough to know how to open a door and to run away when the shit hits the fan. But also quite low CR, so ostensibly are a large number of mooks. So the combat we just finished before the holiday was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 enemies.
Right.
Off the top of my head, 8 inventors, a sorcerer, a dragon shield, 2 giant weasels. Off the top of my head, from memory, that's what it was. So there's.
That sounds so complex, man.
Oh man, it was. It was. It was quite cool to do the tactics again. So like the dragon shield was kind of at the front, blocking the tunnel into the room to stop the players kind of flooding in, doing his job as a dragon shield. That's their bread and butter. Again, with the sorcerer behind, just flinging stuff down the tunnel, and surrounded by 8 inventors just throwing flasks of acid and fire and generating wasps and doing all sorts of weird stuff. My recommendation would be don't rely too heavily on inventors, because they can do crazy, weird, complicated stuff. And I ended up just being like, okay, they're just going to throw a flask of fire or a flask of acid, because I really, really don't want to have to pull into the tabletop another badger or another set of wasps or a snake, because man, I can't. I'm at my limit with my mental capacity of how many stat blocks I'm having to
Skip between.
shuffle through. Yeah, and one of the players, the Death Cleric, he killed the dragon shield and basically like held up the corpse and said, "This is your defender, and I've killed him. So, what do you think I'm going to do to you?" And I was like, oh, "Thank fuck for that, because now I can just have half of them run away here."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh man, that's great. I'm going to roll." And yeah, some passed their save. Some were like, "No, okay, I'm either blind or insane and enough to stay." But I think good 3 or 4 of them were like, "I'm a head out. I'm done," which is kind of nice, and I think quite in theme of non-Dragon Shield kobolds to be like, okay, no, he was our world's mightiest hero, and I'm gonna out of here.
He's now decapitated. I'm not sticking around to see.
Yeah.
Just so this is something that has only very recently happened in the campaign. So the thing that I'm going to try and get at here is that the PC progression throughout the game in a narrative sense in this one. So when my characters started out, basically I trapped them all together and they just had to do the thing, because you've got to do this thing to get home. You ain't in Kansas anymore. That's my I love that way of running it, because it avoids so many of the problems of the character motivation. You just give them something that all of them have to do in order to be able to carry on being the people that they wrote their characters as. That sounds harsher than it is. What it is getting home, usually for me.
Yeah.
So when they started out, they were very reluctant to take on any of the problems for this world and this population that they'd found themselves in, because they were just only interested in getting home. So the first part of their arc was, oh, we've got to go and kill this bad guy, and then that's hopefully going to get us a step closer to what our characters want. Fine. As things have progressed, NPCs of various stripe have impressed more and more upon them. Just the importance of the NPCs' lives, do you know what I mean? And so they've gone from just worrying about their party and themselves to now their latest little arc was they had to go and they rescued like 500, 600 prisoners from somewhere. So now they're having to manage an entire mini army that are fairly ineffectual in terms of giving them any help, but that's their duty as heroes now, which they're kind of taking on. Don't get me wrong, there's certain characters in there that are still much more self-centered than the others, but last session, it was just a brief one. They got the group of prisoners and everyone to an oasis and were settling down for a long rest. The vast majority of it was the characters RPing amongst themselves, but just to kind of impress upon them the world building element of it, there was a small attack by 3 undead direwolves, right? So for level 11 characters, 3 direwolves at a CR1, that's really a cakewalk. There's nothing. Actually, it turned out to be a lot. Took longer than I expected, because of where they were on the map. People were a lot further away, so they had at least a round, if not a round and a half, of fighting through a crowd to get to where the actual problem was. And in that they're down a party member anyway, who's dead and in a ring of mind shielding, but they fought and killed these dire wolves, obviously pretty goddamn easily. But while they were doing it, one of the dire wolves was savaging an NPC. And the last thing that happened was between the players go and the next players go, you had the dire wolves, and they killed the guy, this NPC that they were savaging. And so the combat ended. Everyone, wait, we killed the wolves. But I reiterated that the NPC's wife, who had just watched all of this, was crying. And so there is a progression there from in motivation for the characters, because straight away they started beating themselves up a little bit. At least certainly one character did, one of the newer characters, but all of them did go, oh, we could have done that slightly differently. And so now it's not just, oh, we've won the battle. There are these extra motivations and extra objectives, and utilizing those in order to make encounters harder can progress your world, can progress your characters, like your NPCs involvement, but also progresses your character's ability to play and their motivations for that PC as well. So I can't ever understate the importance of those kind of little narrative things for progression as well.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of having that motivation in addition to the setting motivation you described at the beginning. And something I need to work on a little bit more myself. I've been too reliant on implicit motivation of there's a big bad, he needs to be stopped, where a couple of my players have quite rightly been like, I don't really care too much. And I've probably lent on them meeting me 3/4 of the way a little bit more than I should have had. So
I've written this story, so you should care about it, obviously. I think that's filling in the edges. I mean, I'm always a massive fan of grimdark, so I mean, you can go too far the other way with that as well, and like everyone's just like, well, look, if it's all going horribly wrong all the time anyway, I just don't care, and I want to save my own skin, which means you're back at square one again. But just having NPCs that they care about, and just having those little minor stories of mundanity, because this the thing that's happened at the end, as silence kind of spreads across the crowd, and you hear the woman crying that's just lost her husband, and that all of a sudden there's like, oh, this reiterates the motivation for why we are doing this thing that we're doing. Interesting, just sorry, this is a complete aside and just a little talking about literal progression, slightly forgot that 600 people walking through a desert is going to go slightly slower than 5 party members going through the desert. So I had to retcon briefly the other session and say, no, sorry, you didn't move 3 hexes, you actually moved half of 1. So occasionally you've got to roll back progression. But
yes, yeah. One of the things I was going to talk about was physically moving forward through the world, but we're almost at time, so I think I'll save that one for geography, which is a topic coming up in a later episode at some point. I think that'd be a good fit for there. But one thing I wanted to mention, and you brought it up earlier on, was DM progression. So we've talked an awful lot about characters and a fair amount about player progression, but not so much about DM progression. So my question to you would be, how do you think you've progressed as a dungeon master?
I've got a hell of a lot lazier. much lazier. There's a meme that I saw a little while ago, which was just like, it was so perfect, and it's the gist of it is me prepping for my first campaign, and I think it's the woman with all the kind of algebraic symbols across her face, or the guy with all of the conspiracy theory guy with all the things on the walls and all the strings coming out of them. It's me prepping for my first campaign, and then the next one is me prepping for my latest session. And I've got a notepad. It says "frog in a top hat." This is going to be incredible. So I think one of the things is that I have become quite a lot more relaxed. Once I've got the overall story arc there, I'm a
Yeah.
lot more happy with winging it and letting the players drive each session. For me, there was a tendency, I think, to think that I had to plan everything out. I probably go to swing, like I say, way too far the other way now. But at the same time, however much planning you do, your players are always going to come in and dick it up. So one of the things is I plan less and I'm more happy with rolling with players' motivations are and how they affect the world, because that's one thing that I really champion not being too strict on your planning for, is that you do have that ability to flip on a dime and change the motivations of everything, change the responses of the world to the PCs. You don't want to go too over the top with that either, but so that's one way that I've got it. I think I pressurized myself less as well. That first time when had my first session, and they were in a pub, and they had to go and speak to somebody, and they'd gone in there and they'd kind of chatted to him for a couple of seconds, and they'd done a small amount of interaction with each other, and then they looked at me, and I looked back at them, and they looked at me, and I went, oh God, they need something to happen now.
Yes.
That I think I don't really get. And in fact, this last session, a lot of it was, I felt, don't get me wrong, I massively enjoyed it, but a lot of it was me kind of going, are you going to have a long rest now so that we can do tomorrow? And the player's like, no, we're going to sit around a campfire and talk for another 45 minutes. I'm like, well, fine. In that case, I'm going to roll another cigarette, have another beer, and I'm going to sit back and just listen to you quip at each other. So I think I pressurise myself less. Depends on your kind of DM style, and very much depends on your table, as with all of these things. But that's certainly one way where I've progressed as a DM, I think.
You're probably lazier because you're more confident in your ability to make up, so you have to do less upfront prep anyway.
Exactly, yeah. That's very much part of it. Also, I've already got the basic framework, and also that basic framework has had to mold and change as, I mean, occasionally we've had new people join the table, but more importantly than that, I think, as the characters have done things that I didn't expect them to do, so the world's progressed because of them. How about you, man? What's your feeling in your progression as a DM? Where did you start and where are you now?
Now, see, this isn't how the podcast works. It's my prerogative of the host to not answer difficult questions.
You've got a lot meaner.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Now I know how it feels for my guests when I ask them tricky questions. I don't know. That is a difficult one. It's one of those ones that's like, if you boil a frog, it doesn't know, it doesn't jump out. It's one of those things where it takes so long, you don't notice the subtle differences and the subtle changes. In some ways, I am a lot more lax, but in other ways, I'm a lot more strict.
Presumably because you know the rules better.
Yeah, and it kind of equals out in the end. So let me elaborate a little bit more. So I'm a lot more lax around, like you said, about making sure things happen in a predetermined fashion. I'm a lot more carefree, and the players can do what they want, and a lot more capable to allow that and enable and facilitate that kind of play. Whereas at the beginning, it's, as you said, it's a lot more, I need you to speak to this guy at the inn because I'm a bit scared, and the book says you need to speak to the guy at the inn, and I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't speak to the guy at the inn. And it might not be that's an extreme example, but that thought process happens a lot smaller, but a lot more frequent, which obviously colours and shapes the game you play. And once you get rid of the burden of that self-imposed anxiety, it becomes a lot more flexible and freeform.
Yep.
Now, on the other hand, I'm more strict when it comes to spells and when it comes to things players can do. And yes, I like rule of cool, and yes, I don't mind people kick flipping and back flipping around and doing all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff, but I have a couple of very clear internalized rules. I don't know whether I'll be good or evil, but I'm definitely lawful DM.
Right. Yeah.
And I really don't want players to do something which will give them an unfair advantage over their peers.
Yep.
So I don't want the rogue to be able to get advantage on every hit it makes because he does it in a flashy way because his acrobatics is so high.
Right.
And I'm super paranoid of opening that door. And also, I don't want to give advantage to more charisma-based people who are better at talking in real world because you're giving them an in-game benefit for their out-of-game benefit, which I know is hypocritical because I'm literally doing that to the most extreme it can be with my with my level up carrot. But some people are more charismatic than others, and they have less control over that. Everybody has control over reading the fucking rules. So,
Yeah, and I think you're maybe being a little bit harsh yourself there in that you're the one DM. The table is a group of players. There's nothing to stop somebody who's about to try and do something stupid to get one of their fellow party members to go, wait, don't do that. Don't. There's, I mean, unless you're really, really, really shit hot on no conversing, in which case you are basically putting it down onto the stupidest person on the table with the worst memory to carry the rest of them to that next thing.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm not like this. I kind of hate this episode because it makes me sound like the world's worst DM. I'm like the stepdad that's come in and said no games past 6 p.m. and bed at 7, kind of thing. But it isn't really like that, and my players will attest.
You're trying to get them to work together as a team as well and have all of the elements working. Because if you've got 2-3 people that know the rules that are carrying the party, it's going to be tiring for them as well, man. That's fine, I think.
Yeah. So there's that mental overhead, isn't there, of kind of having to work 1.25 players.
Exactly.
So I'm really quite strict on spell intent and the rules as a balanced mechanic.
Mhm.
So I don't want one person to become overpowered because one time they did that Spetsnaz backflip hatchet throw and it got them a +10 to their hit. Because then even the wizard's going to want to do a Spetsnaz backflip magic missile throw because it will give them more damage, and then everyone's backflipping everywhere, and now it's just dumb.
It come onto a similar thing with if you cripple a monster once, then everybody constantly tries to ham every thing they come across.
Mm-hmm. And the ironic thing is a lot of that stuff already exists in the game. Like, if you wanted to hamstring monsters, then you go a fighter, and there's maneuvers and feats and stuff that allow you to do that.
Yeah.
And there's rogue subclasses that allow you to get advantage if you do certain things. And like monsters have stuff that means if they move 10 foot in a turn, they do like a ramming thing. I'd be open to officially homebrewing that as a feat if it doesn't already exist, but you can't just say every time someone moves 10 foot forward, they ram, because that's just going to completely throw off the kind of delicate action economy and balance of the game.
No, absolutely, man.
Yeah, so I'm probably a little bit more tougher on that as I've grown. And I hope it's for the overall betterment. It might not seem like it, but it is for the overall betterment. And yeah, I just think a lot more capable is my really shitty answer that means absolutely nothing.
I mean, that's what we can aim for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being more capable, and the other thing is progression doesn't end as well.
Mm-hmm.
It is that bar that's constantly ahead of you. You can always get better. There's that thing of we have no idea on the upper limits of a person's efficacy.
Mm-hmm. There are definitely ways that I can improve, and I think that is probably the biggest thing you can have as a DM is the self-awareness to identify where you can improve, which now makes me sound super big-headed as well, which is great.
But it's true. If you don't know your flaws, you don't know where you're going, do you?
Yeah. So there's I know where I improve, and thanks to my players and having some time off over the holiday period, I've come back and have quite a clear 2 or 3 points where I'm going to say, okay, this is the homework that I've done over the holiday period, and its intent is to give you guys a better time. So I am going to make things less obscure, almost for the sake of obscurity, because confusion and obscurity doesn't mean mystery or a fun time. It just means people are lost and a bit baffled.
Which again breaks immersion. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to start. I was always super paranoid of, I don't want to give my players too much because it'll be too easy and it'll be like babies first campaign. But I think probably every DM at some point has had to Google, riddles for children, and realize that when you're really playing at the game, and maybe it's after work, or maybe people have had a few drinks. Not everyone's operating at crisis capacity.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
You've got a lot more leeway to really kind of lampshade hang a few things, and it still be, a gratifying experience.
Yeah.
Magic items is something I'm going to be a bit more generous with, because A, I've been stingy, and B, you and I have discussed how they can be a kind of a soft progression for the character without a hard level up.
Yep.
Kind of arbitrarily standing behind it.
Yep. On magic items as well, man, I would always say almost build it like a character, and like it's got benefit, it's got a limit, and give it a flaw as well.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that constantly, but necessarily, and don't make it a massive flaw. But even a little quirk is always nice to add on to magic items, so that they're not just a pure perfect thing. There's always just this slight weirdness to them, which adds to that. But sorry, that's more of an aside.
Well, it makes them more interesting.
Exactly.
Just in the same way that characters are more interesting when they've got foibles and neuroses and stuff. The magic items are more memorable if they have something weird and wacky about them.
DMs are more interesting with what flaws and foibles and are paranoid as well, I think.
Well, we're hella interesting in that case.
That's why I said it, man.
Wicked. Well, I personally couldn't think of a better way to end this episode than saying how great we are.
Yep.
So, what we'll do is we'll end it there, unless there's anything specific you would like to add.
No, I think we've covered, without going in for another hour and a half, 2 hours, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there.
Yeah, so thank you again, Jamie, for coming on, the prestigious position of the first person to be on twice.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
Thank you all very much at home for joining Jamie and me on our sometimes rambling journey of introspection at some points. And yeah, we've covered a whole bunch of stuff, and I hope that people have come out the other side, both players and DMs, having learned maybe at least one small thing that they might not have thought of before. If you have thought of everything and think we are wrong, then please drop me a message at any of my socials, and I'd love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night.